minutes for transparency. So is there anyone opposed to that idea? Okay, for all of those of you in the gallery, there's been a technical difficulty with our streaming of the meeting. It should be fixed in 10 minutes. And so on that basis, we're going to delay the commencement of the meeting for 10 more minutes.
That's probably you. Thanks. How are you? Very well. So it's it might be less than that. Can you get that on screen?
Thank you. Well, I'm very pleased to say that technical glitch has been fixed.
Recording in progress.
And so on that basis, we're starting on time. Welcome to this council meeting. I would like to welcome those joining us online and those present in the room, and all of the councillors present here this evening. Before we begin, I call on Councillor Shannon Welsh to give the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands in which we meet and to pay our respect to the ancestors, past, present, and emerging. In March 2022, the Council resolved to support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. On Thursday, August 10th, the Council hosted a sold-out event to explain and answer questions about the First Nations voice to Parliament. Most councils in our region have not resolved to support the voice for fear of being political. The voice is not political. It is an invitation from the First Nations people. It is an issue of human rights. Hopefully, now that this council has shown the way, other councils will help to lead their communities.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. That we have one request for remote access from Councillor Spenceley. Councillor Berrigan.
Mayor, I'd like to move that Councillor Spenceley be permitted to attend remotely due to the reason of travel that he has provided.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Mutton. I put that to the meeting. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, and we welcome Councillor Spenceley to the meeting. Are there any disclosures of interest? No. This meeting is being recorded and made publicly available on Council's website. Those present should refrain from making any defamatory statements. By attending the meeting, you are giving consent to your image and voice being webcast. Councillors, council staff and members of the public must ensure that mobile phones are turned to silent during meetings. Councillors who need to use their phone to text, talk or engage in social media activity must leave the chamber to do so. Now, is there anyone for the confirmation of minutes? Is there a mover? Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Gibson. Is there any discussion? No, I put the item. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Councillors, we have a number of speakers to address two of the items here this evening. The first is item 10.11, planning proposal 2 of 2023 for 601 Pacific Highway, St Leonards. One person has registered to speak. And in relation to item 10.2, the planning proposal 5 of 2023, 115 to 125 Holt Avenue, Cremorne, there are 5 people registered to speak. Do I have a procedural motion to open the public forum for each of those items? Councillor Berricky.
Mayor, I'd like to move that we open the public forum for items 10.1 and 10.2 and invite the speakers to address the council.
Seconded by Councillor Lamb. I put that to the meeting. All those in favour? Thank you. That is carried unanimously. In which case I will now open the public forum and we will bring both those items forward. The first is item 10.1, planning proposal 2 of 23, 601 Pacific Highway. The registered speaker is Mr. Graham Collins. Would you like to come forward? Do that, Chair. You give your name and who you represent.
Thank you. Graham Collins representing Stockland. He's the proponent for the planning proposal. Just like to thanks for having us, and all I would say is we support the recommendation put forward to council vote to progress the planning proposal to Gateway. I'm here to answer any questions if you have.
Are there any questions of the speaker? No, thank you, Mr. Collins. Is there a mover for the item?
Move the recommendation.
Councillor Berrigue, seconded by Councillor Gibson. Is there any discussion? Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank our staff for putting together this report and all the work they've done over the period. I want to just make a few comments. Obviously, this is the rather attractive currently IBM building on Pacific Highway in St Leonards. Probably, in my personal view, one of the more attractive buildings in the area, and a really great shame to see it being demolished. A perfectly good building. A few points to note. You know, the North Sydney Local Planning Panel, you know, even they found this proposal to be excessive originally. Stocklands, I thank them for coming today and offering to speak. I note that there's no voluntary planning agreement to deliver public benefits offered. Just make that note. Another point worthy of making, Mayor, is that the site is located within the area covered by the St Leonards and Crow's Nest 2036 plan. A plan that, in my view, has already turned parts of this area into a dark and windswept tunnel, particularly during winter. It's not a pleasant place to walk through. Massive densification happening in that tiny area. This will add to it. It is, of course, as the report notes, a dense urban environment, and an inevitable degree of overshadowing is expected. But I don't support the level of overshadowing. The report notes also that the applicant's wind assessment identifies significant wind tunnelling and velocity impacts, but that assessment only addresses the general wind effects identifiable by visual inspection of the architectural drawings and does not include wind tunnel testing. I would also note, Mayor, that in terms of the public submissions, they were unanimous that there was overshadowing, privacy, wind impacts, traffic congestion and pedestrian movement would be significant, overcrowding, public domain comfort and safety, sustainability, noise and other air quality impacts were all very prominent in the concerns of the submissions, as well as, of course, the overall cumulative impact of development in the area. This development is out of step with community expectations, going on the submissions alone. I return to my first point, which is that we are knocking down a perfectly good building. And in my view, that is completely inconsistent with sustainability principles. I was reading an article in the Sydney Morning Herald in the last 12 months or so, stating that modern cities such as Sydney are becoming ghettos of rich people where few working people can afford to live. I know this is a commercial building, although they wanted to have a residential significant portion there. And I take inspiration from the quote, never demolish, unquote, architects Vassal and Lasarten, who won the Pritzker Prize, the world's most prestigious architectural prize in 2021 for a series of projects where they refused to raise existing public housing, apartment and blocks and museums and instead focus on making them better. So Mayor, I don't support this planning proposal to rezone to 4 times roughly the current height.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Berrigan?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to just amend the motion that I've put forward and insert a number 3, which reads that upon completion of recommendation 1 and 2 and any proposed voluntary planning agreement agreed to with the proponent, that this, oh, sorry, yep, sure. Yep. That for the number 3 is that upon completion of recommendation 1 and 2.
Yep.
That the report return to council complete with the offer of any voluntary planning agreement put forward by the proponent prior to being forwarded to the Department of Planning and Education of Environment, and then take out 3, 4 and 5.
Is the seconder prepared to take that on? Councillor Gibson?
Let me just reread the point. Take out 3, 4 and 5.
Because it's coming back to council before it moves forward.
Okay, yep, I'm happy with that.
Thank you. The mover and seconder have slightly changed that so that there'll be a further report to council. Is there any further discussion? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. That takes us now to item 10.2, the planning proposal for 115 to 125 Holt Avenue. There are a number of registered speakers. The first is Catherine Clark. If you would come forward to the seat at the table between Councillor Mutton and Councillor Lapouris. And give your name and who you represent.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. My name is Catherine Clark and I'm a co-convener for the Harrison Bennett Precinct. And I'm here this evening to express the precinct's strong support for the heritage listing of the dwellings at 115 to 125 Holt Avenue. And full planning proposal number 523. Residents in our area immensely value and treasure our local heritage because that is what makes our suburb so special and distinctive and provides an important link between past, present and future generations. Our community believes that items of heritage significance, such as these dwellings, should be preserved and celebrated. The heritage listing of the Holt Avenue dwellings has been justified by extensive inquiry undertaken by independent heritage experts, GML, through historical research, physical analysis, comparative analysis, and an assessment of the State Heritage Register assessment criteria. And I also understand that the precinct forwarded some extra research that discovered the link, a more or less tenuous, I should say, link between the architect garden and the building of the houses in Holt Avenue. The houses are, as I said, were associated with the local architect, Edward Garden. They retain a high level of integrity and intactness and provide a rare glimpse into middle-class housing and lifestyles in the area during the early 20th century. The precinct concurs with the findings of GML, the GML inquiry and the recommendations in planning proposal number 5 of 23, that the items should be heritage listed as items of local heritage significance. The precinct would especially like to thank the council staff for all their work in preparing this comprehensive planning proposal and we respectfully ask councillors to support the local heritage listing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Ms Clark? Thank you for your participation. The next registered speaker is Fiona Gracie. You come forward, please.
Good evening. My name is Fiona Gracie and I am the founder of the Cremorne Conservation Group, which is a non-profit local community group with around 1,000 members currently. Our group's primary objective is to protect the heritage of Cremorne and the surrounding suburbs. And we do that in part by looking to the planning processes and ensuring that heritage is given adequate protection in planning decisions. We are facing, as a community, intensifying development pressure. And what that means is that heritage is at risk of being demolished. And once it's demolished, we've lost it permanently. So tonight, I want to express my very strong support for this planning proposal to go forward. I want to also repeat what the previous speaker said and acknowledge the amount of work and effort and dedication that's been demonstrated by council and councillor staff in the face of some challenging issues to date. And one of those issues was last year when we had the setback with the Department of Planning not supporting the original planning proposal to proceed past Gateway. So council, on recommendation and further advice from the Independent Planning Commission, undertook extensive work and put forward a new planning proposal, which is what we are looking at here tonight. So this new planning proposal meticulously has looked at all of the requirements that were set forward by the Independent Planning Commission. So what we have now, we had it before, but what we have now is a high quality planning proposal that demonstrates both site-specific and strategic merit. And on that point alone, I strongly recommend support of the proposal. And the evidence is abundantly clear. As again mentioned by the previous speaker, GML Heritage undertook a heritage assessment of the properties from 115 to 123 as a group and 125 as an independent item, and found that they met the criteria for cultural significance on historic, aesthetic, associative, representative and rarity values. What you may not know is I recently had the opportunity of addressing the North Sydney Local Planning Panel on this matter. And in the face of strong support from the developer and their associated representatives to oppose the planning proposal, the North Sydney Planning Panel unanimously supported this proposal to go forward, and that further reinforces its merits. So there's no doubt that heritage holds immense value for our community in terms of our sense of place identity and in connection to our past. And we as a community have a responsibility to ensure that we retain our heritage for our future. So I urge you to support this planning proposal before us tonight and to work with the Department of Planning and its stakeholders to ensure a successful outcome that will uphold community values.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? No, thank you again for your participation.
Thank you.
Sarah Coe, if you too would come forward.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Sarah Coe and I'm a local resident of Cremorne. I'm here this evening to express my strong support for this planning proposal. And I want to start off by thanking all of you for all your efforts in protecting our heritage here in North Sydney LGA. And like the other two speakers, I also want to thank council staff for delivering a high quality, a very robust and comprehensive planning proposal. So thanks council staff for all your work. I would like to share with you why I think protection of our heritage is so important for our community. In every corner of our suburb, there are buildings and structures that carry stories of generations past. Whether it be the historic worker cottages on Parraween Street, or the Hayden Orpheum Art Deco cinema, or in this case, where we've got a rare set of 6 highly intact Federation dwellings built in the early 1900s, associated with a prominent architect of that era. All of these items of heritage significance carry stories of our past and form an integral part of our local area's cultural identity and history. But unfortunately, with the increasing pressure of development, we face the increasing risk that we end up losing our items of heritage significance. And that's why I think it's so important that where we can, we take steps to protect our heritage, and where appropriate, so where it's backed by independent, objective evidence and assessment, that we identify and protect new items of significance, especially as we continue to move into the future. I would also like to make the point that protection of our heritage is a responsibility that we have that's enshrined in our law. It's a key object of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act that provides for the sustainable management of our built and cultural heritage, including Aboriginal cultural heritage. It's core to the Heritage Act, and it's a key aim of the North Sydney LEP. And I'm raising this because I want to highlight that protection of our heritage is not just a sentimentality or an optional responsibility. It's actually a responsibility that we have enshrined in our law, and it's enshrined in our law because of the vital importance of heritage to the public interest, to our communities. In terms of the planning proposal that's before you, I think it's clear that the heritage listing of 115 to 125 Holt Avenue is justified by the extensive inquiry undertaken by independent experts GML, and also that the planning proposal has merit, and that's evidenced by the detailed site-specific and strategic merit assessment that Council has undertaken, that's documented in the report before you. And it's also evidenced by the fact that the North Sydney Local Planning Panel at their meeting on 19th of July unanimously endorsed the planning proposal to proceed to gateway determination and to public exhibition. So councillors, in closing, I respectfully seek your support for this planning proposal and for your continued support for the heritage listing of the Holt Avenue houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you again for your participation.
Thank you.
The next registered speaker is Ben Salon. If you would come forward, please. And if you would give your name and who you represent.
My name is Ben Salon, and I'm here representing the owner of 115 to 119 Holt Avenue, Cremorne, which is Holt Avenue, Cremorne Pty Ltd. Mayor, I'm unsure if it's necessary, but I am a solicitor for that, and to the extent that I need, I just seek your leave to be able to make the submission.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm instructed to address you on this agenda item 10.2 in the planning proposal, the subject of which is the local heritage listing of our clients' properties. You should have our letter dated 11th of August 2023 before you. Thank you, Mayor. Our client's deeply concerned about the report that's been put before councillors for the proposed resolution council to progress the planning proposal for a gateway determination. Our client's particularly concerned that the findings of the reports from 6 of the state's leading heritage experts that the properties do not warrant heritage listing have not been adequately drawn to the councillors' attentions or directly put before councillors in that agenda item report. As councillors would be aware, the Local Government Act requires councils to act fairly, ethically and without bias, and in the interests of the local community, and to consider diverse community interests. Council's Code of Conduct requires councils to take all the relevant facts into the consideration and for issues to be considered fairly in the exercise of council's functions. And of course, the rules of procedural fairness it also require councils to act fairly, especially when the decision will have an effect on an interest of an individual, such as here, where the subject of the planning proposal is our client's Holt Avenue properties. In our view, those requirements mean that councillors must give genuine and proper consideration to the findings of the heritage experts which don't support the local heritage listing of our clients' Holt Avenue properties. In our view, the failure to include in the agenda item report the findings of heritage experts which don't support the local heritage listing of our clients' Holt Street properties, alongside the 3 pages of findings of the GML report, means that the requirements of the Local Government Act, Council's Code of Conduct and the rules of procedural fairness won't have been met. Should a resolution be made to progress the planning proposal towards a gateway determination without the requisite genuine and proper consideration of the findings of those leading heritage experts who don't support the local heritage of our listing of our clients' Holt Avenue properties, then the resolutions would be liable to be set aside in Land and Environment Court proceedings for a breach of the Local Government Act and the rules of procedural fairness. Accordingly, we ask councillors to defer this item until such times as the findings of those 6 leading heritage experts which oppose or don't support the local heritage listing of our clients' Holt Avenue properties, have been directly put before you, and you've had time to give those reports genuine and proper consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so I'm a bit surprised that the reports weren't included. So you think this is a reasonable basis for deferral, and you think if we had access to that information, we might possibly vote differently, or? Well, ma'am, yes, I think that it would be reasonable, particularly with those requirements in the Local Government Act and the Code of Conduct, to alongside the 3 pages that detail the findings of the GML report which support the listing, to see that there's also 6 of the state's leading heritage experts that say that those places don't have the heritage value to support that listing. Could you remind me again who those experts Yes, ma'am. Oh, actually, I can remind you of some of them. Stephen Davies of Urbis. Yeah. We've got John Ultram. And there's James Phillips from Weir Phillips. And there's, sorry, I've just forgotten the names of these 2 ones, ma'am, but it's from City Plan Heritage and MBRS. Okay. And so particularly the first bunch of who I was able to give you their names, those folks are leading heritage experts in this state. And the folks over at GML, well, they're entitled to their finding too, right? And their report. But I think it would be only fair that councillors had the opposing view, you councillors had the opposing view in front of you in your report before you make that decision, so that you have considered the diverse interests of the community and have assessed things ethically, fairly and without bias.
Thank you.
Ma'am.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Spenceley.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. My question is, I mean, this seems a highly technical argument, and, you know, councillors are not heritage experts, and council has asked the company that we've employed, the experts that we've employed, to look into those reports that have a countering view and then provide us with any information as to whether those views or any of the points raised in those countering reports alters GML's recommendation. Do you not believe that us asking our expert is us discharging our duty correctly?
I think the duties apply to council staff and to councillors as individuals. And I accept what you say, actually, councillor, that council itself has had its staff look into it. But
but I do think that the report that is put in front of you as councillors is sadly lacking, where it details in such length the technical findings of GML, but makes really next to no mention, like it barely acknowledges that there's an expert countering opinion exists.
Thank you. Councillor Spenceley?
I guess if I could follow that up, Mayor. So I guess my question is councillors aren't heritage experts. We employ a heritage expert, which is GML. We have directed them to assess the heritage reports that provide a countering view, and they have come back, so in detail, and they have come back and believe that that does not change their view. So I'm confused as to why you're asking councillors to form their own views of heritage reports rather than relying on the experts, and specifically directing the our expert, to review the work of their peers.
I'm not sure I can add too much more to it, councillor, except that if that was the case, then I guess there wouldn't be really much need to put the detailed findings of the GML report in the council's report to you councillors. And secondly to that, I'm not sure that council's staff and institutions have themselves made, like for example, the planning panel, the local planning panel have made a finding about the heritage value of these properties in its own right. The other thing is, councillor, is that the GML report might have responded to the 6 heritage experts, but that same opportunity hasn't been afforded of those experts to say what they think about the GML report. Now that could go on forever, but that's why I think it would be in the interest of procedural fairness to put some detail, even the detail that our letter has in it about the conclusions of the reports. And I don't think you need to be a heritage expert to read and understand just those short conclusions.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
The last registered speaker is John Ultram. If you would come forward, please, and give your name and who you represent.
Thank you, councillors. My name is John Ultram. I have my own company, John Ultram Heritage and Design, and we prepared an independent study of buildings at 115 to 123, not 125. But the focus of our recent attention has been on 115 to 119. And we've prepared a number of reports and updated reports for Mr. Wang, who's the owner of those properties, through his company. Just in regard to the GML assessment, I've read the latest assessment. And in terms of historic significance, I don't think they've just demonstrated that either the subdivision pattern or the houses themselves are rare. Under associative significance and also partly under aesthetic, they've drawn a very long bow in identifying Edward Skelton Garden as the architect of these 3 houses, which is based on a single newspaper contract let notice between the architect and the builder Thomas Ross, who did actually build these houses, we think. But the houses are identified as being 3 houses in Neutral Bay, which these sites are not. I accept that that could be an error or just a wording typo. But the association with those 2 parties was quite common. They've worked together quite a lot in North Sydney, and the GML report identifies 3 other houses in Spofford Street, which could equally be the 3 houses identified. It's also worth noting that in the GML report, they refer several times to the term likely. Likely was the architect, but then in the final assessment of significance, they turn that into certainty. And I don't think you can ever, I would never, ever make an assessment of that association based on such scant information. And yet that provides the basis for the reassessment largely of the significance of these buildings or builders on their case. In terms of the physical assessment of the buildings, it's worth noting that GML did not do any internal inspections of these buildings. We've done internal inspections of all of the buildings and also inspected all of the GIPA files from council that were provided to us by council on a GIPA request that clearly show the level of alteration that has occurred to these buildings. two-storey extensions from the rear, extensive alterations of the original roof forms, extensive internal alterations. Some of that is accepted in the GML report. This idea that these houses are largely intact, either externally or internally, is simply not the case. And that was one of the reasons I think Mr. Salon was making the point about reading the alternate reports, because they do actually make that point quite clearly and thoroughly, I think. They rely very much on the idea that these houses are rare. Neither the subdivision pattern nor the houses themselves are rare. They do not form a group. Numbers 115 and 117 are similar. 119 is very different. In the terms of the overall grouping, neither do they make a group, and the comparative analysis that they provided in relation to that type of grouping, I thought was rather irrelevant, because it chose groups identified in the North Sydney LEP, which did not correspond in any way to the type or form of the houses in Holt Avenue. I have spent my whole working life preserving, conserving, trying to preserve important heritage buildings, and that emphasis is on important. I think it's very important that council consider the bar that they are setting for assessment of significance of these buildings, and they do not lower that to the point where any period house in North Sydney could be considered to be a heritage item, and I think that would be a great mistake.
Thank you. That's over your 3 minutes. But if you just wait, is there any questions of the speaker? No, thank you very much for your, oh, hold on, there is one. Councillor Spenceley. You have a question? Sorry, you're on mute, if you would.
Thank you. Sorry, just I wasn't quite clear at the front. You're engaged by who to provide the report, sorry?
The owner of 115 to 119. We were also approached by the owners of 121 and 123, and we did assessments of those properties as well, but that's sort of been distilled into the 3 houses that are being considered for redevelopment.
And so this is, you're primarily engaged by the developer?
I was engaged by the developer, yes. But I would make a point, at the time of appointment, we were given no writing instructions. All I was asked to do was carry out a heritage assessment of the buildings, and that is what we did.
And look, I do appreciate you providing the your view, as I think that helps us with the previous speaker's view that we haven't ideally considered the alternate.
Thank you.
Case.
Have you got a question? Yeah,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Councillor Berrigan.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Welsh.
I'll just briefly speak to it. I think myself, I'm well across the detail. I think we've known a lot about the Holt Avenue houses over quite a significant amount of time, and appreciate all of the speakers coming to address council today. I would just note that what's before council has been, for want of better words, endorsed by the local planning panel and their assessment report, which provide a history of the matter of all previous considerations, including the Independent Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and the Land and Environment. So we've been across the whole of the detail, and in coming to this conclusion and accepting the recommendations in the report, I feel that I've discharged my duties as a councillor. I feel that I am fully informed in the decision that I'm making, and I feel confident in supporting the recommendation of council staff.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Just before I give you, oh, sorry, who's Councillor Spenceley? Thank you. So my apologies. If you would unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'd really like to echo Councillor Berrigan's comments. This matter has been before council numerous times. This matter has been before Land and Environments. We've been provided with enormous amounts of detail and documents and reports. Council has engaged consultants. Council has diligenced those consultants' reports against previous reports, and council, I think, has discharged its duties sufficiently and in great detail on this matter. And pleased to be able to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I give you your right of reply, Councillor Berrigan, I'm going to speak briefly on this. Councillors, you all know that in January 2022, at the first council meeting that we held as a council, this council resolved to issue an interim heritage order on Holt Avenue. There were many reports since that time that councillors are aware of, including the applicant's reports supporting the demolition of these buildings. We have been aware of and reported at every stage of the North Sydney Local Planning Panel's consideration of this on more than one occasion, at which time they were addressed by a number of the heritage experts engaged by the applicant. We engaged as a council in order to explore the heritage significance GML as independent heritage experts. That recommendation ultimately went to the Independent Planning Commission, where again, the applicant made multiple submissions and their consultants were able to speak. Again, councillors have had reports on that. There have been multiple reports. There have been addendum reports to the GML report that we have before us tonight. There is an addendum report to the report that's before us tonight that specifically addresses the matters raised in relation to procedural fairness by Mills Oakley by their letter of even date. So we've had an independent report from GML. We've had multiple reports over nearly 2 years. We have participated and understood what happened at the IPC. And as Councillor Beregi said, we have given genuine and proper consideration to this matter, armed with the detail over nearly 2 years in multiple reports. I'm comfortable that in supporting the motion, I'm acting not only fairly, ethically, and without bias, and well informed, but in the best interests of the community and in the public interest. As Sarah Coe said to us not too long ago, the objects of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act require us to consider heritage. The aims and objectives of our own North Sydney LEP require us to place significance on heritage. And we have a report before us that is asking us to list these items as items of local significance based on independent heritage advice. We have had consideration of the applicant's position, and on that basis, I am satisfied that we are carrying out our duties carefully and consistently with our requirements under the Local Government and the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And without any further ado, I give Councillor Beregi a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I'd like to say is that there seems to have been an inference that we just want to list everything with heritage, and it seems to be a way of not looking at development. And I'd just like to say there are instances that this council has really sought to have something listed, but the evidence has provided not sufficient information. We have had to back away from it. So with respect, the council, I myself, and I would like to speak and say all councillors take their role very seriously. We do read what's before us. We did sometimes have to make some tough decisions which are against the community, but when we make those, we provide the evidence to the community that we can't support it any further. In this case, we can. I'm very confident in the work of our consultants and of our staff, and feel very strengthened in the support that our local planning panel has also provided as well. We are well across this detail, and I'd ask the council to support the recommendation.
I put the motion, all those in favour? Those against? That's Councillor Gibson and Councillor Lapouris. The motion is carried. Thank you for your participation. That takes us back to the agenda. The next item is item 9.1, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting minutes. Is there a mover? Councillor Beregi, a seconder? Councillor Santa, is there any discussion? I'll put the item, all those in favour? That's carried unanimously. That takes us to 10.3, changes to precinct committees. Is there a mover? Councillor Welsh. Is there a seconder? Councillor Beregi, you wish to speak?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I've been given this document. It was published in 1982, and I'm going to read it out. It's about the history of the precinct system. In 1972, council created a system of consultative neighborhood committees to assist it to obtain planning information and advice in conjunction with a review of the 1972 residential flat code. By a process of public meetings held in specific local areas, some 56 residential precincts were created with an average population of 400 people. Between 1972 and 1975, 33 public meetings were held in the precincts. They discussed the implications of higher density development in the area. Each precinct committee examined planning proposals and distributed a questionnaire seeking local opinion. About 5% of the target population attended the meetings, and about 1/3 of the population responded to the questionnaire. Over time, these various committees developed in different directions, making various representations to council over a wider range of issues than the planning review, which was the original reason for being. During the period 1973 to 1977, extensive interest was shown in the precinct system. Studies by various investigators from the USA, New Zealand, and several Australian groups were carried out. And in 1974, council received the Blewett Award, an award for initiative and achievement in local government in New South Wales, based on, among other things, the creation of the precinct system. By 1977, various aldermen were dissatisfied with the precinct system and moved for its abolition. These elected members saw the system as being in competition with their own role. They also objected to the way in which some precincts were demanding more than merely an advisory role in town planning. These factors led to the disbanding of the precincts committee. Following a period of some turbulence and a series of major public meetings, the committees were reinstated, but in a token form. Without any support or direction from council and no administrative backup, the precinct system virtually collapsed. And by 1980, only 4 or 5 of the original 50-odd committees still existed. In November 1980, as the result of a mayoral minute, a committee was formed consisting of the mayor, interested aldermen, and town clerk, with power to co-opt to report to council on the restructuring of the precinct system, setting out objectives, procedures, and costs for the reactivation of the system. In arguing the case for the precinct system in this minute, the mayor wrote, "The representative system of democracy, which exists at federal, state, and local government levels, is only a very crude democratic system, and in many cases has proved a negation of the ideal. Nobody can look after their interests better than the person concerned." The committee formed as a result of the mayoral minute developed a set of objectives and procedures for precinct committees. A series of public meetings was held in each neighborhood locality to discuss the concept of public involvement in council's decision-making processes. At these meetings, the draft objectives and procedures were also canvassed, and the question of boundaries for each precinct was discussed. The council's aim was to define boundaries in terms of both geographical constraints and similarly of the interests, i.e. community interests. The result of this series of public meetings was the establishment of a network of 25 precincts, each of approximately 2,000 residents. Lack of interest or artificially imposed boundary constraints have since led to modifications, giving a total of 24 currently active precincts.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? In which case, Councillor Santa.
Thank you, Mayor. I speak as a former convener of a precinct. And I know that there has been some criticism of the precinct system, that it fails to be a proper consultative mechanism because it doesn't really represent what the community is thinking. But in addressing that, I moved to paraphrase a certain former British Prime Minister who once said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And I think that the precinct system, for all its faults, and perhaps we need to continually look at any necessary reforms that could be made, it is an effective means of communication of advice to the council from the community. And I applaud these amalgamations. I think they're worthwhile if it means that they enhance the particular committee's concern. This is a very small move, but it's something that shows that we are doing the necessary work to ensure that it remains an effective mechanism of advice to the council.
Thank you. Any other discussion? put the item. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Next item, 10.4, provision of expenses and facilities to councillors. Is there a mover? Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Berry. Any discussion? Put the item. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 10.5, economic development strategy. Councillor Santa, do you move the recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll read it out.
Yep. Oh, no need
No
to.
need to?
Just
Okay,
if you
fine.
moved by Councillor Santa, seconded by Councillor Berricky. Do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. I must confess, when I read this in the papers, I was absolutely delighted to read it at a time when we have to exercise fiscal constraints to find the $116,000. I think is a great step. This is something that really comes to the heart of what this council is all about. We have to ensure that we do everything we can to encourage business in the community. My particular hope is that tourism is a major component of that strategy. But alongside the new director that we've appointed, and I applaud the general manager in what she's in the decisions she's made, and I think that whatever we can do, ensure that we enhance small business in this community is for the good, and this money will be well spent, and I will endorse the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Mayor. I also endorse. I'll make a point that is noted in the report that the pandemic and the resultant change to the way people work, live and play is a factor that we need to explore. And so I endorse that. It also brings into question the need for the same level of commercial development as well. So I would add that point on as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any other discussion? I'll put the item. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Establishment of North Sydney Disability Inclusion Committee. Is it Councillor Welsh?
I moved the recommendation.
Yep.
I welcome the establishment of a North Sydney Disability Inclusion Committee and its role in providing advice, expertise, and guidance on so many factors that affect those in our community with a disability. Increase awareness and the development of our spaces with a view to enhancing inclusion will improve our community for everyone. I support the recommendation and Councillor Bergy as chair of the committee.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? I put the item. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. That brings us to item 10.7, the Code of Conduct Investigation Report. Do I have a motion to move into closed session so that we can consider that? Councillor Spenceley, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Santa. All those in favour? And that is carried. For those watching online, we will now be closing the meeting and we will resume back into open session after consideration of the item.